Literary Princess, and today I am going to tell you about what I'm teaching in British Literature 3, particularly my unit on the Romantics. So I was super excited this semester to be allowed to teach, first of all, something that wasn't first year writing because I've taught 7 sections of that and I'm bored with it. But also to just get to teach a literature class, and not only that, but to get to teach a literature class that is basically half on the stuff that I do. Because British Literature 3 at my university covers from the Romantics to the Postmodernists. So I'm like set on the Romantics and the Victorians because that's what I do. So the Modernists and the Postmodernists I'm a little more nervous about, but I'm psyched. So I am actually done with the Romantics unit now, and we're like a third of the way through the Victorians, actually. But I thought I would share with you all what I'm teaching on my syllabus and kind of some of my students' reactions to it because it was pretty funny. So the book that I am mostly drawing off of for this class is actually the 8th edition of the Norton Anthology of English Literature, Volume 2, which is at campus because I'm not lugging that thing around with me if I don't have to. I own the 7th edition, which doesn't have all the same things, but has most of the same things. And I didn't make my students buy it. I have given them links to ones they can find online, and then ones that are like selections of a longer piece. I have made copies, like a PDF, and put them on our class page so that they can access them there, because I don't want them buying the 8th edition of the Norton Anthology of English Literature, Volume 2, because that's ridiculous. So a lot of these are in there. I do have quite a few of these works just on my own, so I am going to hold them up when I do have them. And if I don't, I will put a picture of something related. So we started off with some of the early Romantic poets, and we looked at Charlotte Smith and Mary Robinson. So from Charlotte Smith, we read To Sleep, Written in the Churchyard at Middleton in Sussex, and this is a long one, On Being Cautioned Against Walking on a Headland Overlooking the Sea because it was frequented by a lunatic. We all got a good laugh out of the length of that name. So Charlotte Smith is a very depressing poet. She had a very difficult life. So my students were very surprised by that, but were also quite intrigued. A lot of them ended up writing about her for their Romantics paper. But we also read from Mary Robinson, London Summer Morning, and The Haunted Beach. So I'm not a huge poetry person at all, as I proceed to teach literally almost all poetry in this unit because it's the Romantics. But I really like both Smith and Robinson. I get on with their writing. We then moved on to Abolition and the Woman Question. We read from Anna Letitia Barbauld 3 poems: The Mouse's Petition, Epistle to William Wilberforce, Esquire, on the rejection of the bill for abolishing the slave trade, and The Rights of Women. The Mouse's Petition is using this mouse that she found in a trap that was going to be used in a scientific experiment as a metaphor. Based on her language, it's more likely she's using it as a metaphor for slavery, but my students found that one very interesting. We then also read a selection from Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Women. It was a very short section, I think, from the introduction and possibly from chapter 1. And then we also had a presentation this day. I am having my students present on underread authors from the periods. So this student presented on Mary Prince, who is a Black woman writer who was a slave, narrative about her time as a slave. It came out in 1830, I believe, So, which is technically considered Victorian, but the era she was writing about was the Romantic era, which is why I had this presentation at this point. We were supposed to have a class on just the Lake School, so Wordsworth and Coleridge, and then we were gonna have a class on Blake and Blake and Keats, who are just kind of like on their own. And then we were going to have a class on Byron and Shelley one day. However, it got below 0 where I live on the day we were supposed to be doing the Lake School. So I was like, no. The university didn't cancel class, but they were like, instructors, use your discretion. And also, any non-essential staff shouldn't be on campus. I was like, well, you know what's not essential? Talking about romantic poets. So we didn't do that. We stayed home. So instead, we had a class on Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Blake. From Wordsworth, we read the preface to Lyrical Ballads, or selections from it, I should say. We did not read the whole thing. Which is Wordsworth's kind of manifesto on what romantic poetry is. So I had that involved in one of the final essay questions. We also then read Tintern Abbey and I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. From Coleridge, we only read The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and because our class is only 50 minutes, and B, because we had to condense, we did not get enough time. Even one of my students said, I was like, so we're going to turn to The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. One of my students was like, we do not have time to unpack all that. I was like, no, we don't. We do not. But we did read it. I actually really like The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. It's fun. I don't have a collection for Blake, so I'll put up Songs of Innocence and Experience here. So we read from the Songs of Innocence, The Chimney Sweeper, and then the corresponding poem in Songs of Experience, which is also called The Chimney Sweeper. We were going to do The Lamb and the Tiger had we had time, but we did not have time. So on this day, we had 2 presentations. We had one on Dorothy Wordsworth, who was William Wordsworth's sister, and then we had one on Amelia Opie, who was a romantic novelist. Next up, we had a class on the Gothic novel. I love the Gothic novel. So we read from Anna Letitia Barbauld and her brother, John Aiken, on the pleasure derived from objects of terror with Sir Bertrand, a fragment, which is just kind of an essay on why people like Gothic literature, and then they kind of put their theory into practice with the fragment. We then also read selections from Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, which is considered the first Gothic novel, and then selections from Anne Radcliffe's The Romance of the Forest, and then also from The Mysteries of Udolpho. I love the Gothic novel, so this was kind of my favorite class. I wrote my master's dissertation on Victorian Gothic novels, so I do a lot with the Gothic and I have fun with it. So this was really fun for me, and to see kind of how they reacted and to talk about the difference between terror and horror and Gothic and horror. It was really fun. Our next class was on Keats, Byron, and Shelley. So we got Keats. We read Ode to a Nightingale and Ode on a Grecian Urn, and honestly, we did not get to talk about Keats really at all. We were talking a lot about Byron. We all had lots of thoughts about Byron, so Keats kind of got pushed to the wayside, which is sad because he's one of my favorites of the Romantic poets, and he also wrote a sonnet about a cat that I didn't have them read. But anyway, yeah, poor Keats. George Gordon, Lord Byron. We read She Walks in Beauty and Darkness, and Darkness is where we spent a lot of our time. Just because it's such an interesting poem. It's like kind of this apocalyptic setting where the sun just suddenly stops shining and there's no more light and people panic and then people are fighting. And so we went through like line by line to kind of dissect it. And I also was giving them some historical context about 1816, the year without a summer, which seemed to be where a lot of Byron's ideas were coming from, because the weather was really horrible. There was horrible harvests resulting in famine. There was a lot of illness. And it was because of a volcano eruption, which they did not know at the time. But we spent a lot of time on that, and they seemed to really enjoy that. And then we read from Percy Shelley, Ozymandias and Mont Blanc. We didn't really spend a whole lot of time. We did look at Ozymandias, which is so short that you can do that. Mont Blanc, we just kind of went through and we're like, okay, yeah, romantic poet. But it gets mentioned so much in Frankenstein that it was pretty important. And then we had a presentation on Caroline Lamb, who had had an affair with Lord Byron, and this was fascinating because of just the drama. So she actually published a book that was just essentially a thinly veiled version of their love affair. So like a kiss and tell. But that was a very fun presentation. We enjoyed that a lot. I also forgot to mention that we did have a presentation on Maria Edgeworth as well, who wrote Belinda and Castle Rackrent. That ended the short pieces, and we moved into with the novel. So the way I have the class structured is for each period we spend 2 weeks on kind of shorter pieces with the main themes that I am having them look at, and then kind of the major authors, and then we read one novel. And of course we read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And a few of them had read it before, but a few of them hadn't, and reactions to this were great. Basically, we all hate Victor. For the 1832 edition, Mary Shelley heavily revised and kind of made Victor more like Percy Shelley, who had passed away at that point. My students were like, yeah, okay, we get he's supposed to be Percy Shelley, but let's be real, he's Lord Byron, because Lord Byron was off having children with multiple women and then abandoning them in convents where they died of typhus. And Victor is making a child and abandoning it immediately. So they had fun with that. We were talking about, is this Gothic or is this horror? We decided, based on the scenes that we were looking at, it's ultimately more horror than Gothic, actually, because Gothic relies on terror, which is kind of the buildup of suspense, whereas horror is the reveal. And this relies much more on the reveal of the monster. We don't get huge buildup to the monster waking up. We just go right into it. And it's terrifying. Or I guess you should say it's horrifying. But we talked a lot about that. And basically just what a bad person Victor Frankenstein is. Everyone felt really bad for the creature because it's not his fault. And he could have been good. He could have been good if he just had somebody teaching him and hadn't been rejected by everybody. We all had a lot of feelings. I'm sure you can tell I have a lot of feelings. My students also talked about kind of the expectations they had going in and then what they got, which was very different because for most of them, their experience had been with movies of Frankenstein. And one actually said she was home with her parents and telling her father that she read Frankenstein. And they were kind of talking past each other because she was talking about the book and he was talking about the movies, and there's such a disconnect. So that was all really interesting. We had a pretty good time with the romantics, and that is what we read. They then had to write a 3 to 5 page essay responding to one of 3 prompts. The first prompt was, William Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballads is considered a manifesto of romantic poetry. Choose one poet we've looked at in this unit. In what ways does this poet meet Wordsworth's standards for poetry? In what ways do they fall short? The prompt number 2 was, This period saw a rise in support for abolition, women's rights, and the French Revolution. How do these causes reflect the ideals of Romanticism that we've discussed? Draw on at least 2 texts for specific examples. Prompt number 3 was, while Frankenstein is a thoroughly romantic work, Shelley does not agree blindly with all of the movement's ideals. In what ways can we consider the novel a critique of Romanticism? To what or to who could Shelley be responding to with this critique? So I have not graded their I've graded 2 of their essays. One who was writing about the poets, and then one who was writing about the political movements, and they were both very good. I still have 12 more to grade, I think, and I need to do that. But I'm very excited to see what they wrote about. I kind of flipped through and saw, like, you know, quite a few were writing about Charlotte Smith, a few were writing about Coleridge. So yeah, that is what I taught for the Romantics in my British Literature 3 class. Let me know down in the comments below. Have you taken a British Literature class on the Romantics? What did you read in it? Did you read some of the same things I had my students read? Do you like the Romantics? Which ones do you like? Who do you hate? Is it Byron? Let me know down in the comments below. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.